All right, what's happening, everybody? This is my first video on my acoustic guitar build at home. I am building a 12-string acoustic neck through. What? There's no such thing as an acoustic neck through. Well, if all goes to plan, there's gonna be. If all goes to plan. So here's where I'm at right now. So check it out. This looks a little crazy, but I'll explain it all. Give you guys a look at it first. That's my line where my saddle is going to be. That's the shelf, what I'm calling the shelf, because it's a neck through. There are parts of the guitar that don't exist, so I had to invent names for them. This is the shelf. This is the diving board. Here's the neck to body joint. That's not really a joint. There's the neck, the headstock. Still got some planing to do, thicknessing to do, ears to glue on, shape the neck. Got a router, all these hard corners so they're rounded over, so I don't have any hard corners in there. When I was designing this, I gave it a lot of thought. Some things are just going to be difficult, and I'm not going to be able to get around that. Like the bracing. Bracing is going to be a challenge. Every brace that I put in this guitar is going to be like custom. I think it's going to all be worth it. Because 12 strings have some failure points on them. Ask any luthier, what's wrong with 12 strings? They're all going to give you the same two answers. The neck joint fails, and the bridge fails. It's just a matter of fact that if you buy a 12 string, those are the two most common failure points. Why? Why do they fail there? Well, the bridge is kind of obvious, right? And it's the same reason that the body pulls apart from the neck. It's just the excessive amount of string tension between the two. If it's one, are we going to stabilize that body to neck joint, that body to neck union, I should say, because this is not a joint. It's just where the body and the neck meet. So I think I got it resolved here. I'll tell you how this is going to work, but first we'll talk about the bridge. You got a bridge sitting, a bridge that is 5/16 of an inch thick. It's made out of rosewood or walnut or some hardwood. That is glued down to a 2.5 millimeter thick soundboard. All right, there's already like not a whole lot of meat there, right? Which is sitting on the X bracing in most cases under the soundboard, and it has a bridge plate, what they call a bridge plate, underneath of where that bridge glues down to the soundboard. So there's another reinforcing piece under here. So it's kind of a lot of layers of wood and glue and wood and glue and wood that I would rather not have. They fail by the bridge just either pulling off. Number one, they just pull the bridge right off of the face of the guitar, or they fail by the bridge deforming the shape of the radius of the guitar top. You've got 12 strings pulling towards the nut this way, and if this is your bridge, let's put this, I got a little drawing on there that represents a notched cutout in a piece of rosewood, right? So whatever's left underneath your notch, plus the thickness of your soundboard, and then your bridge plate and your X bracing. So there's a lot of potential places for that to fail, right? So I tried to eliminate that. I also don't like the idea of my saddle sitting on a piece of rosewood that's sitting on my soundboard that's sitting on a plate. I want that saddle to transfer as much of that sound into the body of the guitar as I can possibly get. And I think the best way to do that is to have the saddle have direct contact with the soundboard. I think on the high end 12 strings, you'll see that saddle is sitting, touching the soundboard. They route all the way through that bridge so that your saddle makes direct contact. My saddle will make direct contact with that, which will then have this diving board underneath of it. The diving board is cool because, sorry, I got some tools on the table there. Let's try again. Okay, you hear that? It's like a tuning fork. When I spring it here, I feel it where I'm holding it. So there's a lot of vibration traveling around this. Now this is not the finished shape yet. I'm going to round all this over both sides so that inside the guitar I have nice rounded edges, no hard square edges. So that's how I want the bridge to be, but where are the strings gonna pull? So if you have that rosewood bridge sitting there and you have all those holes in that, all those holes drilled in your hardwood, like every time you cut a hole in a piece of wood, you're making it weaker. So I'm just gonna have a saddle here with something to hold that saddle in place. It'll look kind of traditional, like a regular guitar, except where the strings come over the saddle, what holds the strings to the guitar. I could put a trapeze on there, but then it's kind of like a jazz guitar, and I don't really want to play a jazz guitar. So I'm gonna have to make a tail piece that holds the 12 strings. I looked around and around and around. I looked all over. I spent hours trying to find something that I liked, and what I got in my head is not what I'm finding. So when we get to that bridge, I'll show you what I got in mind. But that explains what's going on up here and how I think that's going to alleviate some of those failures that you're seeing in the 12 string. But even more common than the bridge failure, remember, as those strings are pulling on that bridge, as you pull this up towards the nut, you're putting this belly in the guitar. And not only are you pulling up on that belly, you're pulling on those braces, they come unglued. You're pushing down on the front of it. So there's just a host of problems that come with that bridge system. The other big failure, probably the bigger failure, is where the body and the neck meet. There's a joint. They make the box and they make the neck, and then they put them together. And you always have a back angle on the body to account for the string height and the thickness of the bridge and the saddle. So you never see a straight body guitar, because you have to account for that radius of the soundboard. You have to account for the thickness of the bridge and the saddle. I think I've engineered my way around that, where I'm still able to radius the soundboard on the top and on the bottom. I'll do a 25 foot here and a 50 foot here, and it will be radiused everywhere except where that fretboard comes in. On most acoustic guitars, I think on every guitar that I've ever got to play or seen, on an acoustic guitar, what they do on that joint where the neck comes in and then the body has this angle on it, is they just take that fretboard, Because remember, the fretboard runs onto the body. They just take that fretboard. There's two things you can do. You can put a shim under it, a wedge, and clamp it down and glue it to have a perfectly straight fretboard. Or what is the more common method is they just take the fretboard and they just bend it down and glue it in place. I don't want my fretboard to go in and bend down. I don't want that. So on a Les Paul, where the fretboard comes onto the body, it's all straight. It's all perfectly flat and straight all the way across. And then the radius on the front of that guitar goes away, out to the edge of the guitar. Everywhere except where that fretboard is. So that's my plan. I'm going to do that same thing, and it's a much gentler radius on a acoustic guitar than it would be on a Les Paul. So it's going to have a little flat spot on the soundboard right here on the shelf. The sound hole is going to be here. The fretboard comes across on a flat body that radius is away from the sound hole around the whole guitar, except for this one little section right here, just like a Les Paul. The second point of failure, and the bigger of the two, is right here at this joint. Okay, so I've got the lines drawn on there. This is the width of the fretboard at the 14th fret. So the 14th fret, if you don't know, is the fret that lines up with the body of the guitar. Everything after the 14th fret is on top of the body. Everything before the 14th fret is on the neck. So if that's the 14th fret and that's the width, you see that little tiny little section right there? It's maybe 3/32 of an inch. So when I shape this neck, you can see it tapers in. Now it doesn't taper in a great deal because remember, the nut on an acoustic 12 string is wider than the nut on a 6 string. A good bit wider. It's like 50 mil on a 12 string versus 42 mil on a 6 string. Up here, the width doesn't change up here because the neck would be so wide up here that the width of the bridge on a 12 string is the same as the width of a bridge on a 6 string because your strings go wider and wider as they go up the fretboard. So down here it doesn't matter. Down here it does matter, but right here at the 14th fret, because this is wider, it changes this dimension from being skinny to being a little bit wider. So the way that I came up with the thickness for how wide this has to be was the width of the fretboard at the 14th fret, which is from this line right here to that line right there. So when I shape this neck, I will put the fretboard on here and I will router the width of the neck, which will follow that line, and that width that you see right there, that little 3/32 of an inch, is also going to come off of the heel of the neck, even though it's not a real heel because it's a neck through. So this will be a 3/32 of an inch thinner here and 3/32 of an inch thinner here. This line is where the body comes in to the guitar. So think of your body coming around and going in right there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to thickness or widthness the neck. I'm going to get the neck to the right width, and that width will be consistent all the way down the heel. And then from that body line, I will cut a notch in the side of the guitar, maybe 1/8 of an inch, not very deep at all. It's just a notch big enough for the body to dive in to the neck. And then I'll have, like a neck block on a regular guitar. You know how the neck block is the thing that the bolts go through. I'm not going to have that. All that this neck block is going to do is going to be to reinforce, to give some strength instead of just that 1/4 or 1/8 inch deep notch. That's not enough glue surface. So I'll have a piece of wood in here, that probably maybe even follow that rounded shape there. That gives more surface area right here for the neck, for the body to grab on to the neck. Okay? Hopefully that all makes sense. I still have to bend the sides. I went looking for some nice wood. Man, I was very disappointed. I'm going to have to thickness the wood myself. I do have a planer, but man, that thing makes a mess. If you don't have a planer, you can go to a hobby store, or you can go to one of the big box stores. This was a Home Depot piece here. I always stop and I'm looking for when they replenish, right? When they got nice stuff in. And when they get nice stuff in, I buy a couple pieces and I bring it home and it sits. And it'll sit for like a year. And then a year later I go, oh man, this is a nice piece of wood. Where did I get this? But I really like this piece because it's got like super straight grain on it. It's a very consistent color. I may be using this for the fretboard for this guitar. I was going to do maple sides on this guitar. I've never bent wood before, never. So this is going to be a new experience for me. And according to the research I did, you want straight grain. You don't want a lot of figuring or grain direction changes in the wood, because the steam is going to deform the wood, and it's not going to be as stable as you might want it to be. So I wound up getting 2 pieces of 1/4 inch walnut, because the maple they had was crap. So I got 2 pieces of 1/4 inch thick walnut, which this is pretty nice for guitar size. You can even see their machine marks on them. Yeah, look at all their machine marks all over the place there. That side's a little nicer there. But I thought this was pretty nice. I thought it would make a nice side. I'm not crazy about working with walnut. For some reason, walnut is very irritating to me. Even if I wear a respirator or a paper mask, I get like a burning sensation in my sinus cavity that I don't get with other wood. And I don't know what that's about, but it is definitely a walnut thing. Probably why I was leaning towards doing maple sides on this. But they didn't have maple. They only had walnut. I am going to have to thickness it. There's a couple ways that you can thickness it. I got a great deal on a planer, because I'm there often enough. I just happened to come in when the guy was putting the reduced tag on it, so I got the DeWalt planer, the 734. I think I got, and now they got the 735, and I think that's why it was reduced. But it's still on Amazon for like $549, and I got it for $329. So I had to buy it on principle, right? And plus I knew I was going to start getting into building acoustics. So in the past, how I've thicknessed wood, I've used a router. And there's no reason you can't thickness this with a router. There's a tool you can buy for a drill press or a pillar drill if you're on the other side of the ocean over there. But there's a tool that you can buy. I don't have a drill press. I have a drill press, but it's like this big, right? So I can't use that. But you can use a router and a sled to thickness this down close to what you need. It should be about 2 mils for the sides of the guitar. you can get it down to 2.2 mils with a router, and it'll be pretty consistent on the thickness, as long as you start with a nice flat piece of wood, you have a flat table to work on, and you have you got to make a jig for your router that just goes back and forth, and you just feed the wood through and just keep routering back and forth, and then when you're done, you just hit it with your either your random orbital sander or a belt sander, whatever you got, that a planer, a block plane, that can take it down to its final thickness. I don't use block planes enough. I have a couple of them, but I just go to the belt sander, and I don't know why. I hate sharpening the blades on that thing, on the planers. That's a pain in the neck. It's a half an hour to sharpen the blade and 5 minutes to cut it. So I just go to the belt sander. It does make a bigger mess, and I think that's why people like to use the block plane, because there's no mess. And if your belt sander, I have an oscillating belt sander, if it's not set up properly, if it's not a good quality sander, you'll wind up, your wood winds up like this. You wind up sanding your wood, and it looks like that. You're like, what? Why is it thicker on one side than on the other side? So, I happen to have a good sander that I can trust to give me, pretty square. I still gotta watch it, and even sometimes when I go, okay, I'm done with the sander, I get out the block plane, just to clean it all up and make it perfect. But that's how I'm going to thickness the dark art of bending wood. I'll thickness that down. I will build a bending iron. Now, if you're anything like me and you have watched other videos on how do I bend that wood, what's the best way to bend that wood, there are people that are going to tell you right on their videos, oh, you can just build your own bending iron. It's like $10. I saw one guy said you can build one for $10. And I saw another guy say, yeah, it's like $20 to buy the stuff that you need. Okay, that's not true at all. Here's my receipt. Okay, there's other stuff on here, but suffice it to say, the heating element that you use, that I'm going to use, is for a water heater. Okay, this was the cheapest, smallest one they had. I wanted something, I don't want something 20 inches long, right? So this was the only small one they had. And this was $10, right? So that's pretty cheap. It is 1,500 watts, right? Which is far more than I'm going to need. I think some people use a 450 watt soldering iron to heat their iron. But the problem that I think that I would have with that is that when you put wet room temperature wood on that pipe, you're going to pull a lot of the heat out. And I think you're going to lose temperature very quickly with just a soldering iron. So I opted for this guy here. It's 1,500 watts. I do want to be able to control the temperature of that iron. I don't just want this thing running at 750 degrees, right? That's not going to be good for bending wood. So in order to control it, sorry, almost lost the camera there. In order to control that temperature, you've got to have a variable rheostat switch. And that switch has to be rated to handle the wattage of the thermocouple. So the switch alone is $25. So I don't know what they're talking about, $10. You're also going to need a piece of pipe, a good solid steel pipe. So the one I got was like $8. And the way that I'm going to mount that is with the flange. And the flange was like $10. And then everything else that I'll need to do that build, I have laying around. So if I didn't have everything laying around, I would have to buy screws. I'd have to buy glue, and I'd have to buy at least a 2-foot by 2-foot piece of 1/2 inch. I don't know if I'd trust MDF, but you're going to need some plywood. And that's going to cost you $20, right? Plywood is so expensive right now. But do the math, right? It's not 10 or $20. It's like $60, assuming you have some plywood and some screws and some glue. But, if you're seeing people tell you that it's not going to cost more than 10 or $20, they're lying. It's going to cost more. You saw the receipt. So next steps on this build. One of the challenges that I'm going to have, I got the X-brace thing figured out. It's going to have an X-brace making the arch of the guitar. And I made this the length that it's going to get cut off right here and right here. And that's pretty much going to be where the X-brace crosses the diving board, right? So X-brace comes across this way, and the other X-brace comes across this way, and where those X-braces meet the diving board, those will be integrated together instead of just butt jointed up against each other. Everything has to be like shiplapped inside of everything else for strength. I think every brace that I put inside this guitar is going to have to be custom, because remember, this is all going to be rounded over here. I got to go around with the router and round all this over so I don't have any hard square edges inside the guitar. So there's still a lot of things to do. Nothing that is going to be unachievable. I think I've accounted for everything, but who knows? If I miss something, I think I'm still going to be in good shape with this design. I don't think there's going to be anything that I can't figure out how I'm going to solve it. But on that saddle, remember, my strings are not pulling on the soundboard right where the bridge is. My strings are going to be pulling further back. So the further back I come towards the butt, without using a trapeze to make a jazz guitar, the stronger this neck through is. When I put this between my arms and I try to crush it, I can't get a lot of movement out of this at all. I get maybe a 1/16 of an inch movement, and that's with no bracing, no soundboard. There's nothing really holding this thing out there, because the way that I made this was I have maple going this way, walnut going this way, then maple going this way, then walnut going this way. I tried to use the grain to strengthen. You can see where I have the different pieces of wood where the grains are going like this wherever possible. And that's just going to make everything really, really rigid. I also picked up a huge advantage on my truss rod. Okay, so think about an acoustic guitar with the truss rod that is adjustable inside the sound hole. You've got this much truss rod coming through that's not being used. Okay, do we care about that? Truss rods are cheap. We don't care if we're wasting this much truss rod. We do care because you're changing the center of the truss rod. If you put a truss rod in an acoustic guitar and you've got this much truss rod that's not being used inside the guitar, and when I say not being used, I mean it's you've moved the center of the truss rod up to like the 10th fret. That is just crazy if you ask me. You need to put the shortest truss rod. My truss rod is going to go from this line right here, maybe a 1/4 inch back or a 1/2 inch back, to the nut, and it'll be adjustable here, because I don't want the center of my truss rod, do it this way, to be here. It would be here. I want my truss rod further this way where the neck is thinner and where I would need to have relief in the neck. Something that nobody talks about, and everybody should be talking about that, because it definitely has a huge effect on the functionality of that truss rod. Do you want to build a guitar and the truss rod doesn't adjust the neck where you need the neck adjusted? Or do you want to build a guitar that has a truss rod that you know when you adjust that truss rod, it's going to give you pressure where you want it? Just food for thought. Okay, updates will follow. I know this was a really long video, but there's a lot to talk about when you're reinventing the wheel. But next video should be maybe bracing, or maybe I'll do it after I get this all final shaped. So we'll see, but follow-ups are coming. Peace.